Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you have not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please also fill out a yellow comment card. We will follow the basic format listed on the back of the agenda. It includes all of the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process based on the specific circumstance of each hearing. Next on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the November 13, 2018 and May 28th, 2019 minutes. Does anyone have any corrections to make?
No.
I have a correction to make. On the meeting, November 13th meeting minutes, page 1, very beginning at the call to order, there is an extra provide in the sentence that needs to be removed.
Very nice.
Any other corrections or additions? I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes with the
I'd like to make a motion to approve the November 13, 2018 minutes as amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah, for the other, May
corrections for
28. Yeah, no, I love
motion to approve May 28, 2019 meeting minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Informational items. Are there informational items from staff?
Just a couple. At the last council meeting last week, the council pinned down the housing policies. So that was an action they took. Next Tuesday night, the 30th, is a meeting of the Comp Plan Advisory Committee where they will be looking at the Block 3 policies, hopefully the last time, and then we'll come back to you and to the council. That's it.
Is that open house still open for our viewers on MTV?
I think it closes tomorrow. I am not 100% certain, but
So
yeah,
get on the
if they're-
city's
if
website.
they're- They should
right
get on
front
the.
page.
They should get on the website right now. Oh, we had something like 188 responses.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So, really good response rate.
All right, let's get it over 200, all 12 people that are watching.
Okay, all right.
Good plug. Thanks, Greg. Next is audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. If you wish to comment on an item that is on the agenda, there will be time for comments after the presentation. Does anyone wish to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? Okay. Let's move on to the public hearings. The public hearing on Elk Rock Estates is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application numbers NR-2018-005, LC-2018-001, WG-2018-001, VR-2018-014, VR-2018-015. The purpose of this application is to request natural resources review, Willamette Greenway, and variance request on property located at 12205 and 12225 Southeast 19th Avenue. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning, subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal provision. The applicant has the burden of proving that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I will now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
Title 18.04 flood hazard area. Title 19.301 low density residential zones. Title 19.401 Willamette Greenway zone. Title 19402, Natural Resources, Title 19504, Site Design Standards, Title 19505, Building Design Standards, Title 19600, Off-Street Parking and Loading, Title 19700, Public Facility Improvements, Title 19911, Variances, and Title 19106, Type 3 Review.
All testimony and evidence must be directed to the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit written comments or testify in person or sign the Planning Commission attendance sign-up sheet in the hallway. The conduct of hearing. I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and have given them to me. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. All right. Now, conflicts of interest in site visits. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts?
No.
Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand and say yes?
Yes.
Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application?
No.
Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Let's proceed to the staff report presentation.
Good evening, Vera Coles, Associate Planner here in the Planning Department.
Could you get the mic down closer?
Sorry. And Dalton Vodden is one of our Associate Engineers. We'll be presenting the staff report presentation. Okay. The site is outlined here in blue. It's located at 12205 and 12225 Southeast 19th Avenue. The site is made up of 2 tax lots and contains a total of 3.66 acres. The tax lots run east-west and cross the slough, so they're bisected by the slough. There are 2 existing single-family homes on the site, which will be remodeled and will be part of the proposed development. The surrounding area is zoned residential R5 and consists predominantly of detached single-family homes to the north and east, Elk Rock Island to the west, and Spring Park, and the unimproved Sparrow Street right-of-way to the south. And this is the tax map, so you can see how the tax lots kind of cross the slough. Okay. The project site, again, is bisected by the Willamette Slough, effectively limiting the developable portion of the site to the eastern portion adjacent to 19th Avenue. The site includes Willamette Greenway over the entire site, water quality resources areas, WQR, along the slough and the river, and that's outlined in the green hatched. Habitat conservation areas, which is the orange area, and the 100-year floodplain over essentially all of the site, except for the upland area just along 19th Avenue. The primary project elements as proposed are 10 new single-family homes and 2 remodeled existing homes. A new pedestrian path and repair of an existing dock extending into the slough is also proposed, and enhancements of natural resources to the west of the slough as mitigation for the project. And this site plan outlines the proposal. You see a private drive extending in a T from running west and then north from 19th Avenue. And you see the new homes. They're in the heavy black outline. There's a pedestrian path to the west as well as the dock. And you can see, I'm hoping this shows up with the mouse maybe? Nope. Just wanted to identify that this area is the proposed stormwater and bioswale that was added as part of the amended materials and the revised materials that were submitted to you for this hearing. This was not part of the original package of information. Okay. The applications before you are a natural resources application for a cluster development, Willamette Greenway review, and then a collection of variances. These are the sort of the main applications. There's a lot consolidation as well, but these are the main applications. There are variances for building height for up to 3 stories, side yard setback of 20 feet rather than 25 feet for one of the homes. They're asking for variances for the width of garage doors on several of the homes to exceed 50% of the facade width, so that's a design standard. And there is a question or an issue about the number of access points in close proximity. That's an engineering standard. And they, at this point, as proposed, would need to request a variance from that standard. We understand from the applicant that I think they'll be seeking to meet the standard, but that will require some revisions to the site plan. Key issues have been identified by staff in the staff report. Floodplain impacts. The general question is, how would the proposed development impact the 100-year floodplain? We have natural resource impacts. Does the proposed development adequately address impacts to the map natural resources to avoid, minimize, and mitigate with a reasonable footprint for the cluster development? Willamette Greenway, does the proposed development adequately address the approval criteria for the Willamette Greenway conditional use? And then the variances, are they reasonable? Are the effects of the variance on views as it relates to the Willamette Greenway, that's specific to the 3-story homes? And then the other requested variances, are they reasonable? I'm going to move on to the first key issue, which are the floodplain impacts. And I will advance the slides for you if you'd like, Dalton.
Thank you. Significant impacts in the floodplain for this development include the new homes as well as the renovations. There's a private street as part of this development. There's common space, including that path and that dock. Significant grading to achieve those improvements, as well as a storm facility and a drainage ditch to make up for some of that grading. And so Title 18 contains our flood hazard regulations. That title refers to 2 specific 100-year floodplains, one from FEMA and its floodplain and floodway, as well as the Metro 1996 areas of inundation. And in addition, Title 18 has called out to be considered as minimum requirements. And 18.04.080 says to be liberally construed in favor of the city. And so to differentiate the floodplains, we've got the 100-year floodplain from FEMA as identified on the flood insurance rate maps, the firms, as well as the Metro's areas of inundation. And these are defined within the code. And the area of inundation is the areas along the Willamette River and its backwaters, Johnson and Kellogg Creeks that were flooded to elevation 34.5 NGVD. That's the datum used in February of '96. And so within these, both of those floodplains, there are general standards to follow, including balance, cut, and fill, as well as specific regulations about crawl space constructions. And then there are specific standards regarding new residential construction and substantial improvement requiring the lowest floor to be elevated 1 foot above the base flood elevation. This applies to both floodplains. And so the general standards stipulate that there'll be no net fill in any floodplain, that any excavation below the bank full stage will not count towards that compensatory fill, and that excavation of fill for detention shall be designed to reduce or mitigate flood impacts and improve water quality. And then specifically regarding crawl space, there's a standard for professional design in areas where flood velocities may be greater than 5 feet per second. And then where there are such velocities, other foundation types should be used according to the code. And so as proposed, the development will cut a little over 1,800 cubic yards. Will fill about a little over 1,700 for a net cut of 90.36 cubic yards. They have proposed crawl spaces and enclosed garages below base flood elevations. There is this storm swale facility that runs about 220 feet, about 55 feet wide, and about 6 foot deep. And so that depression is primarily where that cut for that net cut is coming from. On-site plans, provided the applicant has identified the FEMA 100-year floodplain, the ordinary high water mark, and the floodway. And so here we have from FEMA's website an official ferment. It's a portion of the firm map. And so the area indicated in the lower left with the red box, and then enlarged on the right side, clearly shows the 36.4 feet for the FEMA elevation, as well as the flood zone, Zone AE, in which the development is located in. Zone AE, according to FEMA, is marked as a potential for high flood velocities. There's an accompanying flood insurance study that goes along when this map was prepared. And for this cross-section E, which is that dark black line denoted by 36.4 feet, so that crosses in the middle of the site. And so the floodway velocity at times of the flood event was 5.9 feet per second, according to that flood insurance study. And noted in the staff report, that is the velocity at the center of the channel, and so it will flood velocities will be less towards the fringe, but this is Zone AE, which is expected high velocity flood zone. And so some issues with, as proposed, that the cut and fill analysis has not been provided for the 1996 flood plain. The numbers provided were strictly considering the FEMA 100-year floodplain. The bank full stage was not identified by the applicant on materials provided. Some additional materials provided in
Today?
the ones previous to today.
Oh, that would have been the June 24th submission.
As part of the June 24th submission, in order to address some of the crawl space construction concerns about this high flood velocity, there was reference to a study conducted for the Tillicum Crossing that included some modeling that was not prepared by the applicant, but was referenced by the applicant, completed by a separate engineering firm. It was stated that maybe that documentation was provided to FEMA, but no FEMA record number was provided, so we couldn't verify that that model. So as of, with the latest FEMA data we have, it's a high velocity flooded zone. And then there is, due to the regrading, there are steeper grades on the property lines, and so there may be some drainage impacts to neighboring properties. And then that detention area, that large swale, is very close to the river, and it's supposed to receive stormwater flows. And so the new impervious area is being piped to that area, as well as during high flow events in the river. There will be some water that moves back and forth there, potentially overtopping, and so that's not certain how that will affect fish. There was information received today, reasoning why, the applicant's reasoning why the 1996 areas of inundation do not need to be considered. Some inaccurate statement was made about that flood height, and so the city staff member provided today a statement to an email to the applicant, and so part of it read that the applicant is comparing the FEMA NAVD flood elevation to the 1996 NGVD flood elevation without making the appropriate datum conversion. The FEMA-based flood elevation is 36.4 feet, where the 1996 flood elevation in Milwaukee City Code would be 37.978 feet using the same datum. And so the design flood height of 38 feet, rounding up, would be more appropriate. This is not in line with what was submitted today by the applicant.
Nice. All right. So that's a summary of the floodplain and the flood issues. So the next.
I'm sorry, Chair, can I interrupt? That 38 feet, where is that measured from?
So there in Title 18, there's a specific reference to areas of 1996 inundation are at a topographic line of 34.5 according to a specific datum. And so if you convert that datum into the same datum that FEMA uses for their flood elevation, that's where the 38 comes from.
So it's a topographical point on a map?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's elevation 38 as it crosses
you.
the site.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Title 19, Section 402 provides a discretionary process to analyze the impacts of development on water quality resource areas and habitat conservation areas. And I will refer to those as WQRs and HCAs, just for brevity, including measures to prevent negative impacts and requirements for mitigation and enhancement of those areas. The criteria for evaluating development's impacts require the development demonstrate how their activity avoids the intrusion of development into resource areas to the extent practicable, minimizes detrimental impacts if it does in fact impact, if there's no alternative to avoiding any of the disturbance of the resource areas, and then finally to mitigate for adverse impacts if the applicant demonstrates that there's no practicable alternative that would avoid disturbance of the designated natural resources. So that's sort of the hierarchy of the review that we go through. The key question that we've asked is, does the proposed development adequately address impacts to those resource areas to avoid, minimize, and mitigate with a reasonable footprint for the cluster development? When revised materials were submitted following the continued hearing, the applicant prepared a total of 5 design alternatives for evaluation as part of that alternatives analysis under that discretionary review process. And this chart summarizes the alternatives, the preferred being the 12 units that's before you, and then following 2 through 5 with a variety of numbers of units. And then we can see what the WQR and HCA impacts combined would be for each of those alternatives, including any fill in any wetlands, and what, if any, development might have been below the ordinary high water mark of the Willamette River. The alternatives analysis that was provided did not include an alternative that avoided impacts to the map natural resources areas, and again, that avoiding or minimizing those impacts is part of the approval criteria for the development. A question was posed to the applicant as part of the review of those revised materials. Would fewer units, as an example, 9 units clustered at the street, this is based on alternative number 2 that was submitted as part of the alternatives analysis, and a very general, hey, what if you eliminated the units that are in the resource areas? What if it was just those 9, up at the street or something like that? That would significantly avoid and minimize HCA and floodplain impacts. Would that be a viable project? The 9-unit alternative was suggested as a way of asking the applicant to provide a realistic alternative that would avoid impacts to the resource areas and to the floodplain. The applicant did submit a response to that question. That was part of the packet materials, and provide an analysis based specifically on this 9-unit kind of sketch drawing, rather than what we believed, rather than respond to the spirit of the question, which was to consider an alternative that in fact did avoid or do a better job of avoiding impacts, an alternative that avoid those natural resource areas either via fewer units, a different configuration or type of development, or a combination of both. The cluster development section of the Natural Resources Code provides a lot of flexibility. That's kind of the point of the cluster development code. It allows for a variety of layouts for housing, as well as a variety of unit types. So even though the R5 zone is a single-family zone, multiple kinds of units are permitted as part of the cluster development in order to help avoid or minimize impacts to the natural resources. But the applicant did submit a statement kind of working through why the nine-unit development was not an option, that it was below minimum density, that it would reduce visitor parking for Spring Park because of that configuration, that it would block views to the Willamette River, and therefore would not comply to the Willamette Greenway Zone. That's sort of a summary. So there were so as part of that response, the response was this was not practicable and was not considered and would not work, essentially. The applicant contends that the proposed 12 units with mitigation on what we kind of refer to as the island section of the lots is the only feasible alternative that minimizes impacts to the natural resources. This drawing is taken from the applicant's materials. So this kind of summarizes the final proposed alternative, where you can see to the west or to the left of the screen that area outlined in green where you can see test pits and so on. That's sort of the island portion of the site. And so the applicant is proposing to mitigate for the natural resource impacts in that western portion of the parcels to the west of the slough. The overall concept is to plant a wide variety of native shrubs, trees, and ground cover with the aim that suitable species will establish, while others may not, but they'll kind of work their way through and mitigate in that area to the west of the slough. Again, the permanent impacts to the HCA and the WQR are 38,500 square feet. That translates as part of our code when you do the math on what is required. 385 trees and 1,925 shrubs would be that required planting for that mitigation area. And that mitigation area totals a little over 41,000 square feet, just about. So this is that area identified here with the red arrow. So that's the mitigation area, and then to the right or to the east of that is what is proposed as sort of the buildable or the development portion of the site. As noted by ESA, the city's peer review consultant for natural resource applications, the proposed mitigation site does appear to be suitable for the proposed mitigation. It is anticipated that it would be challenging because of its position in the river, in the Willamette River floodplain. There is periodic flooding of this area. There is the existing extent of weeds and presence of shallow bedrock in some areas could present some challenges for the planting of the mitigation area. But despite that, ESA does note that several of the native shrubs and tree species that were identified are anticipated to establish if they're given adequate irrigation and maintenance and care generally. These are some photographs from that mitigation area on site taken last week. So you can see that, and per the applicant's materials, the island area is largely fill material with a compacted clay soil mix. And evidently from the applicant's materials did talk about the area needing to be plowed up with new mulch and compost being brought in, but I understand that they'll be correcting that. That's not in fact the case, so I'll let the applicant speak to that, what they called out in the materials there. And I think they will be saying that that's in fact not going to be required, but I'll let the applicant speak to that. The soils appear to be suitable on site generally, but a lot of site preparation and weed control is going to be needed to be thorough and will require several site visits and treatments. As we were kind of walking around, it really seems like the bulk of this area is blackberry. It's everywhere, basically. But there are Oregon ash, black cottonwood saplings, and trees on site, so there are suitable conditions in this area for the native plants. Floodplains can support wooded areas, and the species that generally thrive, like the Oregon ash, black cottonwood willows, and red alder, should be considered as part of that. Oaks can handle winter flooding. That was a concern that staff had, kind of how are all these species going to work? Will they thrive if they are inundated? But they can handle winter flooding as long as the soils dry out in the summer. So as long as they're not kind of drowning and are constantly sitting in the water. Some plant loss and mortality should be expected due to flooding. The code requires an 80% survival rate. So an ongoing maintenance and monitoring program is going to be required to make sure that those plants essentially take and that mitigation area is successful. We've identified a couple of issues or questions as part of your review. The first is that, is there an alternative that provides 12 units that are built closer to 19th Avenue, that provides parking from maybe below and are clustered as much as possible away from the HCA and the floodplain? We still want, I think, a better answer to that question. And then finally, is the proposed mitigation area appropriate given its propensity to flood and its current natural state? So those are questions that we'd like the applicant to provide some more information on and to help you make your decision. The entire area, the neighborhood, for the most part, is in the Willamette Greenway zone, and the purpose of that zone is to protect, conserve, enhance, and maintain natural, scenic, historic, and recreational qualities of lands along the Willamette River and the major courses that flow into the river. And as I said, the subject property is entirely within that Willamette Greenway zone. These are not all of the approval criteria for the Willamette Greenway, but these are the criteria that are to be considered as part of the Willamette Greenway conditional use review. So a Willamette Greenway approval is a conditional use approval for the project. And these are the criteria that are to be taken into account when reviewing that conditional use. Again, compatibility with the character of the river, protection of views, landscape aesthetics, emphasis on water-oriented recreational uses, protection of the natural environment, and the like. But then there are also approval criteria that go with the conditional use itself. The applicant's materials do talk about the Willamette Greenway review as being consistent with the character of the river. That section has been developed over the past 100 years for residential and commercial use. So, so the proposed residential development is consistent. Their narrative also talks about views to the Willamette River will not be impacted because the main channel of the river is not visible from the property, and they would be removing invasive vegetation and enhancing that vegetative buffer for the greenway. But of course, the project will greatly intensify development impacts on the site. As far as the conditional use piece, there are some key approval criteria as part of that review that are more directly applicable to this application. And those are, are the characteristics of the lots suitable for the proposed use, considering the shape, location, topography of the site, et cetera. Will the operating and physical characteristics of the use be reasonably compatible with and have minimal impact on nearby uses, and will the identified impacts be mitigated to the extent practicable? These criteria are important to consider, particularly the suitability of the site for the proposed development, given that nearly the entire site is within the 100-year floodplain and contains mapped natural resources on essentially virtually, I think we're almost 88% of the site. Based on the applicant's plans, almost all the site would be altered to accommodate the proposed development. Regarding views, these are some pictures that were taken both in the spring, in March, as well as last week. So the view potential on the site changes depending on the season and depending on essentially the leafing out of the trees that are in the area. You'll see on the left is a site plan that was provided that identifies view corridors between buildings. So from the original application, the site plan, they've adjusted the spacing between the houses and align them a little bit differently so that from the right-of-way and sort of down that private drive, they're maintaining the views. Views are considered, views to the river are considered from the public right-of-way as we consider those as part of the approval criteria. Small areas of the Willamette River to the north and the south are visible, but that was mostly in the spring before the trees fully leafed out. Existing views from the public right-of-way are limited, given Elk Rock Island, as well as the trees that surround the perimeter of the site. But there are portions of the river that are visible in the winter and the spring, and again, the site plan does identify some view corridors. The overall views from the public right-of-way toward the river are limited today, and aren't, as far as we believe anyway, are not significant enough to preclude approval of a conditional use application on the property. Again, as we've sort of organized the staff report, summary of issues, do the characteristics of the lot make it suitable for the proposed development given its location in the 100-year floodplain? Mitigation on the island, will it be adequate? Again, given its location in the 100-year floodplain. And we sort of have some unanswered questions or have still wondering about the consideration landscape, aesthetic enhancement, open space and vegetation between the development and the slough. That's part of the approval criteria as well. Moving on to the variances. Regarding the variance to building height, so what they've requested is to allow 3-story homes rather than 2.5 stories. Building height is measured both in feet in the code as well as stories. So the maximum height is 35 feet or 2.5 stories as identified in the code. That's the development standards in the R5 zone. The use of stories in addition to building height generally limits the shape and bulk of buildings in residential areas, and that's the purpose of having such a development standard. In this case, allowing structures that meet the height limit, because they do, they meet the 35 feet, and in fact, they're less than the 35 feet, but they exceed the story limit. So what that would allow is for larger homes than would otherwise be permitted, because 2 full stories of living space would be permitted rather than essentially 1.5 above the garage. And that's a reflection of the building type regarding the 100-year floodplain to a great degree in being able to elevate the living space. So these are some general, some drawings from the applicant's materials to illustrate what those proposed homes might look like. There are also variances requested for side yard setback, garage doors, as I said, and allowing more than one access point in close proximity onto the site. Given specific to the access point variance, Title 12, Section 16 sets standards for the number of access ways, access locations. One access way is allowed on local streets. One additional access way is allowed per frontage where the driveway approaches, including adjacent property access ways, and they can be spaced 150 feet apart. The cluster development on a single parcel with 2 access points will be spaced less than 40 feet apart. So that's the issue here. And the application doesn't address that variance as required. But again, as I said, the applicant has stated that the revised site plans would be prepared to avoid needing that variance. So that's still kind of up in the air, and we'll let the applicant address that issue. However, the remaining requested variances don't result in any significant impacts, at least from our analysis. The natural resource cluster development is required to have a 25-foot setback along all property lines. One of the new homes is located behind an existing home to the south, and it's being proposed to match the side yard setback, and that existing house is at 20 feet, so they're asking for the variance to match that side yard setback as opposed to the 25 feet. The detached homes with the garage doors, they are proposed, they would be exceeding the maximum 50% of the width of the facade. The proposed homes are designed to be narrow, and from the plans it looks like they're approximately 18 to 24 feet wide, so they're sort of your classic kind of narrow or skinny house. The design includes garage doors with wood stain appearance and glazing to better fit into the surrounding environment, so we don't have an issue with that variance. The approval criteria for the variance request include alternatives of impacts and benefits, mitigating impacts, and that if they are reasonable and appropriate. We do think that the variance for the 3-story homes to allow for narrower footprints allows for a greater overall open space on the site, and it is a more efficient use of space because that lower level of the homes is not habitable space due to the floodplain. We do believe that the height variance request is reasonable, given the proposed home design, that the structures will comply with the measured height, so they won't be exceeding that measured height in feet, and the first floor is effectively not usable as living space, so it is a reasonable alternative for the design. Okay. Staff's recommendation is a little different than it normally is when we have hearings like this. The applicant has requested in writing, and you have that as part of your materials tonight, that the record be kept open for written testimony. And we agree that should continue. There's a lot of material here to review, and there will be significant testimony this evening as well. So we concur with the recommendation to close the public hearing, but to keep the record open for written testimony, unless additional time is needed to address the identified issues for more than just written testimony. The applicant requested to continue the hearing to August 27th. But let me just go to the next. Here we go. So the request was written testimony for August 6th. For anyone submitting argument and evidence, that's August 13, not just 13, for anyone to rebut that first open record period, and then August 20th for the applicant to submit additional materials in response to those, sort of that first round of written argument without new evidence. Given that, to deliberate to a tentative decision on August 27th gives us less than a week to prepare materials and have a useful discussion, I think, at a public hearing. So we would recommend that hearing be continued either to September 10th or September 24th, and we can talk about the calendar, but this is sort of just to generally outline how that might work. And then a final decision would be made in September, or actually in October, to kind of push out that deliberation hearing for you to be able to review what is essentially 4 weeks of written material to be submitted. That's a lot. So to have that continued hearing right after the written testimony period closes seems to rush that issue. So we can talk about the calendar, but we think that keeping the record open for written material is reasonable, but we think that the calendar should be changed a little bit from what the applicant recommended. That concludes presentation of the staff report. Happy to answer any questions. The applicant is here to present.
I want you to, or I'll point out that also in the audience is Sarah Hung-Tung, our consultant from ESA, our natural resources consultant. So if you had questions related to that, she can also come up and answer them.
Thank you. All right. Let's start with who's ever ready for any questions for staff. I look away from Commissioner Heemer this way.
I have a number.
Yeah, why don't
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
Sometimes the tax lots are shown as being continuous across the slough, and other times the tax lots are shown as being in two separate pieces. And I'm wondering what the rationale is. What's the true tax lot? Are they discontinuous, and how is the area calculated, considering what's identified as the slough in the maps?
The area does not include the slough. So when you're talking about the tax lots themselves,
It's the red outline.
It's the red outline, exactly, yeah.
And what is the Willamette Slough? How is it differentiated from the Willamette River?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that question.
I ask in terms of views to the river versus views to the slough, and just if it is a distinct water body from the Willamette River, or if it is just shorthand for this part of the Willamette River.
As I understand, it's part of the Willamette River, but certainly not the main channel. of the river, and its water level fluctuates with what's happening in the main channel of the river. And I'm happy to defer to someone else who knows a bit more about that, but it is part of the Willamette River, but it is not the main, certainly not the main channel. But it is inundated, and its water level changes depending on what's happening in the main channel, storm events and that sort of thing as well.
Views of what's labeled the Willamette Slough from Elk Rock Spring Garden Park or Elk Rock Park would be subject to the Willamette Greenway reviews.
Is it, I don't think it's actually named Willamette Slough. I think it's just named Slough. So I don't know if it has a
Which I think is just what it is, not
name.
what it's.
Yeah.
So it is the Willamette River is the city's understanding of that body of water, and everything that applies to the Willamette River would apply to that body of water.
I think so, and I think that's how we've
I
interpreted
think
it.
that's the assumption that we've always had.
Yeah,
Okay.
yep.
Do we know how often the stormwater facility would be inundated?
All impervious surface on site, including from the roofs as well as the street, would be piped to that area. So whenever it rains, it will have water. Specific design elements as to, say, how quickly it will draw down, or what times, or during the winter specifically, if it'll have time to draw down. We haven't seen that level of detail yet, but certainly whenever rain would have fallen on the undeveloped portion, now falls on the impervious area that will rush into that basin.
So I'm asking specifically about how, if the river would enter the stormwater facility and how frequently that might occur based on is that something that's been considered in the city's review?
We have thought of that. We'd like to see more design details before permitting such a facility, but certainly the river would enter that during extreme events.
And do the city's design standards consider how a stormwater facility such as that would be able to withstand flood events of unknown reoccurrence?
So in Title 18 is for stormwater facilities to be constructed in such a way that they mitigate damage from floods and that sort of nature. So that would be a standard that would be necessary to meet.
I'm going to keep going. Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
So I see the standards about the crawl space, or these facilities, some of these buildings have a crawl space instead of the garage or underneath the garage, or is the garage considered to be the crawl space? I've seen the terms used somewhat confused.
Yeah, so, and then in another layer of confusion is per our code in Title 18, a crawl space that is below grade on all sides is a basement. And so basements need to be elevated to 1 foot above base flood elevation as well. And so these may in fact, they are proposed as a type of foundation to be a stem wall foundation with an area underneath the building that behaves as the standard crawl space. And so on some of them it appears as if they'd have to be below grade on all sides, in which case it wouldn't be allowed in our code unless it's raised to 1 foot above. But specifically for design elements of crawl spaces in these high velocity areas, they are not recommended. An additional design would be required. The garages would be constructed with a different type of foundation, most likely. Those would probably be a slab on grade, but it would represent an enclosed area that's below that base flood elevation, which in a high velocity area, flood area, would need to undergo additional design to, in typical, in lower velocity flood zones, you're just worried about the hydrostatic pressures of the flood, but then in these higher velocities, we're worried about the hydrodynamic pressures, and so additional consideration will be needed to go for the garages as well.
So some of the buildings have crawl spaces and others have garages, and that's why
all of them have been proposed with crawl spaces, all the new ones with crawl spaces and garages, and so what's happening on the lower level, it looks like about 40% or 60% of that level closest to the street is of garage, and then the rest is of this stem wall crawl space foundation. And so it'll probably be a hybrid type of foundation. I'm not sure, maybe the applicant will be able to talk more about that. But from what I've seen, it looks like it'll be a partial slab on grade and a partial stem wall foundation.
Understood. There's both a crawl space and a garage. I was envisioning the garage as the entire bottom floor. So this cut and fill and this debate about the 100-year flood elevation or the flood of 96 elevation, and now the current understanding of the city is that the flood of 96 is the higher elevation, something like 1.5 foot higher than the 100-year flood. So I'm struggling to understand how to review this, given that it seems in the applicant's material we're kind of towing very, very close to what was the 100-year flood, and if we're looking at 1.5 foot higher, what is my question here? Will the design, trying to ask a question about how to review this material when we may be looking at 1.5 foot difference in the elevations based on this new information, and maybe I'll ask my question is this a complete application if we're looking at 1.5 foot change to the design materials, which may substantially change what we're looking at in a way that makes some of the information that's in front of us irrelevant?
I think staff has struggled with the amount of information that we've had as well, and with specific timelines too, with how we've received information. And so I think that was the hope of coming here was to be able to present the Planning Commission with what we've seen so far, what we're able to comment on so far, and so I'm not.
So I think I've got a more direct and better question at the moment to think here. Will staff be asking the applicant to redesign the site 1.5 foot higher than it is in the designs that are in front of us today?
Based on some of the design elements that here today, building permits would not be able to be issued for these buildings.
I think reconciling that information is necessary at this point, but the information came in late today, so we're trying to work through the implications of that. So yes, more to be done.
Someone else want to take a chance? I can keep going, but I'll come back to me.
So, help me here. I mean, we've in the documentation we've seen, there's mention that that the existing structures may be like 1 foot short, based upon the crawl spaces and that kind of thing. So is that 1 foot part of Mr. Burns's discussion, or is that an additional foot? Does that make sense, my question?
That would be in addition, if I'm understanding that correctly, in that if we've got a crawl space below grade on all sides, that will have to be raised 1 foot above base flood elevation, so that is 1 foot not considered. And then in addition, if we're using the 38 feet as our base flood elevation, that would have to come up another 1.5 foot.
Okay.
Those garages are allowed to be below flood elevation with additional design considerations in high velocity areas. And if it was not a crawl space foundation, but a slab on grade across the whole bottom, or say a different style where it was up on stilts, something like that, then similar elevations could be maintained and not lose that 1 foot.
Okay. One other question. So, as I understood your report, the floodwater mitigation, ditch or slough or swale or whatever we're calling it, is piped from the street and the property to the swale?
The private street that will be built as part of the development, yes.
Okay. So if we had an inundation situation, is it conceivable that this back up through those pipes to the original drains?
In very high flow events, it could. The base, I didn't do the level of analysis to know on the elevations proposed as of right now. This ditch is different to what the stormwater that was initially submitted, but I mean, that's something that would need to be further
Yeah, I
designed for.
apologize for the, sort of the inexact what-if questions that I'm posing. But, while I salute the applicants wanting to help us provide, more housing, we all want more housing, but especially in a site like this, it's challenging, and we really do have to make sure that we have it right. And so I hope all the stakeholders will bear with us here while we try to make it right.
Those pipes to the street, that street has to be elevated 1 foot above base flood elevation, so there would be significant elevation between the level of the street and the bottom of this,
Yeah, okay.
of this ditch.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, go down here.
I'll go to kind of the natural resource side. So our mangrove trees, which are, I think, just right across from the slough onto Elk Rock Island, are those considered a natural species, and would those survive in that area?
It's a good question. I don't recall seeing mangroves on the list of
Oh,
planting
madrones,
list.
I'm sorry.
Madrones, Mike. Mangroves? I don't think so.
Madrones.
I would let that, if I could, I would have Sarah answer that question as far as being an appropriate species for the water. If you're asking if it would be suitable for a floodplain kind of situation, is that?
Well, they
question, or-
exist on the other side
Right.
of the slough right there.
Yeah.
And they're kind of they have a nice orange bark and kind of a
Right,
nice little
sure.
canopy, and they're kind of a nice tree. And so I was just wondering if that was one of those that is allowed on our species list.
Yeah, I would have to double check the plant list. I believe it is, but I can double check the planting list.
And then on the proposed mitigation site, knowing that that is underwater 6, 7 months out of the year or close to it, what is the seasonal work that would be involved, and how do you evaluate success?
All right, that's a good question. So success was 80% survival.
Right. And the code requires that,
And then who's required,
sorry.
and along with that, who is required to continue that success? Does it change over to the property owner once they buy it, or is it still required of the developer, or do you have any recourse to actually catch somebody?
The code requires annual reporting, requires survivability for 2 years, for the first 2 years. We've, as part of the packet, we've been sort of drafting a working draft of conditions, just to kind of get the conversation going as far as what those might look like. And it's something that we've been concerned about as well. And so some of the conditions talk about mitigation monitoring and a maintenance plan. And that would be something that the developer would submit as part of their permits. We would imagine that at some point, all of that mitigation and monitoring and all of that would then transfer over to what would likely be a homeowners association as part of the development. We've asked for an extended monitoring and maintenance plan for 10 years for the site, given what we think is a very challenging site. And I believe that that's something that would then get transferred over to, so the homeowners association would be responsible. So there is an entity that is responsible for maintaining the mitigation area and making sure that it meets the requirements of the original approval. I don't know if I answered your question. I
No,
hope I did.
that
Okay.
answer. And then are there any proposed tree removals that are on that site?
Invasive species, I believe, would be something that would be removed, and that's part of what we're asking for, is that we don't have sort of a specific planting plan for the mitigation area, and that's something that we've recommended if it goes there as a condition of approval, that in fact a very specific planting plan with some key sort of 40 by 40 sections are provided that identify what invasive species are being removed, where are they, particularly the trees, and what is going in, so that that's something that would be answered as part of that kind of follow-up, as part of the permitting process, that we would get those specifics.
And part of the Willamette Greenway, this is in a particular unique position because it's not only boating access to look from the river, but you also have a park that will look directly upon it and adjacent to it. How has that ever been, is there something in our code that addresses those kind of views particularly?
So views from a public park?
Right.
To how the development might affect a view from a public park?
Right.
Okay. The code specifically calls out views to the Willamette River from downtown as a specific location. And the way, again, we've been interpreting the view question is from the public right-of-way. I'm not sure if we've been interpreting it as from a public park, though.
We haven't. I mean, other than the downtown parks.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Can I follow up on that question, Greg? Looking at the Willamette Greenway Code, it wasn't clear to me that the code refers specifically to reviews of the Willamette River versus views of the Greenway, and I wonder if staff has considered an interpretation of the Willamette Greenway Code that would consider views of the Greenway itself rather than just views of the river, and if that's compatible with an interpretation of code.
I think that's probably true, but what we tend to do in applying that in the past has been to interpret it that the views are from a public right-of-way, public space. It's not from private property to the Greenway.
But it could be from private property, from the right-of-way to a view of the Greenway,
yes.
which would include Elk Rock itself or other vegetated, natural spaces that are not the river, but that are part of the Greenway.
I don't know, I have to look back at the code.
Oh, yeah.
But I think to date, we've been typically applying it to the river as opposed to the land as part of the Greenway with changes all over the place, and it includes, of course, private property and so on. But it's a good question. How does Elk Rock Island specifically kind of fit into that? No, it's a good question.
Got any more? No? Okay. My questions are really about the cluster, the natural resource cluster development, and the code there. So is there any way you can pull up that code?
Well, I have my binder, so I can refer to it that way.
Yeah. Great. Because I realized I had left my binder here, so I didn't get a chance to look it up. But it's not very often that this comes up, right? I've never seen or heard of a natural resource cluster development. So, in your time on staff, have you?
Nope.
Okay.
We have not.
Okay. And, I guess I'm just curious about the flexibility that is involved there. And, I can ask the applicant this as well, but that there really wasn't, it sounds like with the flexibility, there really wasn't a lot of exploration now about potential alternatives, so.
And I think that's a question that we brought up as part of the alternatives analysis.
Right.
Given the flexibility that's permitted as part of the cluster development, I think we were hoping to see some alternatives that were different than from what feels and looks and feels like a single-family home subdivision.
Right.
So I think that's a question for the applicant.
Okay.
To ask the applicant about that, and it's a question that we've raised as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But you're right. That's sort of the point of the cluster code.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'll have to look that up, or maybe I can borrow your page and look at it. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Did you want to go back to your
I
question?
just had one more, which was for the Willamette Greenway, the characteristics of the proposed, the characteristics of the development are consistent with other uses. Has the city done any review of other developments in the floodplain in the Willamette River Greenway? Are we aware that other developments have occurred since the adoption of the Willamette Greenway that are similar in terms of below, within the 100-year floodplain?
If you mean in the city, I
I think I primarily mean in the city, but I'm wondering elsewhere within the Willamette
Yeah.
Greenway if this is a type of use that is common or uncommon or never happened.
Well, we have had other houses developed in the Greenway. We've had some houses developed in the Island Station.
But specifically in the 100-year
Greenway.
floodplain, is that
No, they're not in the floodplain. They're in the Greenway. The Greenway has a pretty broad band. There's also some houses that have developed or been remodeled, and I think a new one built up near the Moda building. So some of those have come to the commission over the years.
Yep.
So yeah, we've certainly seen, all of them have been individual houses, or maybe there was one partition in Island Station, or at least, I don't know if it was a partition, it was actually a lot reconfiguration. So we've had houses built, basically.
And additions and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But,
so
yeah.
the city is not aware of other development in the Willamette Greenway elsewhere in the Willamette Valley in the 100-year floodplain recently, that's not something that's...
We did not do any research like that.
Okay, any other questions for staff?
This may sound like I am completely and totally confused, but they will fill up to the floodplain level to build, right? Isn't that the idea? Up to that, whatever line that is?
It's actually 1 foot above the base flood elevation, so they would be required to do that.
I mean, they're not going to build, the street isn't going to be on stilts and everything else isn't going to be on stilts. They're going to fill that up, right?
Correct. So the private street will need to be raised to 1 foot above base flood elevation, so that's going to all go on fill. And then most of the houses will, if they don't do stilts, then it'll be on engineered fill to raise up to that level. And then at least an equivalent amount of cut will need to be made, hence that very large drainage area right next to the river.
So you I want to understand this. So you create a new bank, or a bank that is 100 feet closer to the river than it exists today. Am I understanding all that correctly?
So we're not impacting the side of the bank. That was one deficiency of this was the applicant did not identify the bank full elevation, and so that will be located on the left side of this image, on the west side, roughly where that dashed line is. That's the beginning of the floodway, and so the applicant is not touching anything in the floodway except reconstructing that dock. And so where the bank full elevation is not entirely certain. Metro defines that bank full elevation as the 2-year recurrence level of the river. They have identified the ordinary high water mark, but not that 2-year level. So any fill that's below that elevation, whatever it may be, if it's below ordinary high water, it's fine because the applicant hasn't proposed anything below ordinary high water elevation. But the bank will stay where it's at, and then there'll be excavation 19th side of the bank to make that ditch, and then everything on that east side will have a lot of fill that goes up to raise a significant amount of that above the base flood elevation.
And before you can proceed with giving a permit, you need to know what that bank fill information is, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I want to note that Dalton used a term I don't think he'd used previously, and that was floodway, which is basically the area below that. Most of it's below bank full, so it's to the west. It includes the slough area and the area more throughout the center of the river. So he said the only development in the floodway was the dock. So just wanted to clarify that.
And that's typical. I mean, all of our docks down on the Willamette River have got to be on the floodway, right? Or
And there's a way to permit that. Yeah.
Any other staff questions? Thank you. Thank you. Great. So now we are going to move on to, let's see, ask Vera a question. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the meeting packet?
Yes. There were materials that were submitted end of the day yesterday and today that were provided to you here at your chairs. There was a letter from Mike Robinson, attorney for the applicant. There were two pieces of correspondence from the environmental consultant for the applicant as well as the engineering consultant for the applicant. And then you also have a copy of the email that was submitted by Beth Bertel on our engineering staff that had to do with that 1996 flood elevation and the discrepancy between the datum conversion for that. So those are all new pieces of information, and they've been posted on the website, but it just happened today, so we're trying to catch up with that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Travis, may I ask one more question of
May.
staff? Just when did you guys decide to change the date? Because we had August 27th on our tentative schedule, so.
Right.
When was that decision made? Was it just made today, yesterday?
As far as
Or why we're going to push, or why you were requesting to push out the date?
that was today, as we've been looking at the calendar and understanding that time frame for written commentary, and then realizing that would give staff less than a week to be able to analyze all that written material for a hearing, for deliberation. It's not enough time to be able to compile that information for a hearing less than a week away.
And
So
have
that's
you been
why.
able to discuss this with the applicant yet?
The applicant is aware of that, and we were hoping to kind of figure out the calendar piece of it this evening.
And this does not get us too close to the 120-day rule, does it?
The applicant has extended the 120-day clock as of now to November 1st, and I understand, and I'll certainly let the applicant speak to this, that there is the possibility of extending that out as needed, but I'll let the applicant speak to that. So right now, we're at November 1st for the extension for the 120-day
Okay,
clock.
thank you.
Yeah. Good question. Sorry, a lot was happening today.
Thank you. Okay. So now we'll take applicant testimony. If you could come forward, and please remember to state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Matt Gillis. My address is 11650 Southwest 67th Avenue, number 210, Tigard, Oregon, 97223. I've been working on this for the last year and a half, trying to meet all the criteria, and we've been doing consistent adjustments to meet all the criteria. We've submitted hundreds of pages of data to meet the code and all the criteria. We designed this to have beautiful homes that fit into the neighborhood and meet all the criteria of maintaining views in the greenway, meeting the floodplain code, meeting the natural resources code, mitigation, all the necessary criteria. We designed them with wood and stone to tie into the greenway character. And the reason we designed the whole site this way is the driveway maintains the views where it's positioned in this a similar position to where the current opening is on 19th. So the site is zoned for 23 to 29 units for the minimum maximum, and then minus deductions for natural resources. The zoning is a minimum of 12 units to a maximum of 18. Our proposed plan is the most practical option to balance all the code requirements and planning requests. There is no way to avoid the HCA due to the extent practicable because it covers approximately 80% of the site. That's not calculated, that's just estimated. It covers most of the site. So to do that 9-unit or building at the street, it would be very expensive. It would require tearing down 2 houses, which would be approximately valued at $800,000 loss. And you'd have super tall, skinny houses that would block all the views from 19th with a 10-foot corridor between two buildings of attached. And so there would be no view, and that would be much higher, especially with the geometry of how they would be positioned, would just block all the views. And that's not desirable for the neighborhood or practical to do that, just because of the way it affects the greenway. You wouldn't have a view from 19th at all to do that. And so we designed these so where they sit down lower. The average human eye from 19th is about 25 feet above the lower portion. And so you're not like getting a big wall of house blocking. By setting them down, you're able to look past the houses, as like the renderings over there show. You could see elk rock and a lot of the trees beyond the houses above because of the way they sit down. And that design would go against a comprehensive plan for tearing down houses. The comprehensive plan mentions maintaining and preserving existing housing stock. It would also go against the desirable living spaces. The final result of our proposed project is a beautiful community with desirable housing that encourages interaction with the river. It blends in with the neighborhood by matching the craftsman style at the street, like that rendering shows. The ones adjacent to it are craftsman style as well. And then and a natural modern character that blends with other houses on 19th. There's a lot of modern and multiple styles of houses on the street, and we feel like the design blends with the natural characteristics. And in terms of the natural resources, we are talking about a mapped natural resources zone. From the previous aerial photos you saw, it's a dirt, weedy lot, it's weedy grasses, blackberries, and thistle. There is little to no environmental or riparian value of this proposed site. This project will benefit the habitat and natural resources. We are building in an area that is currently weedy grasses and dirt, but we're mitigating by removing invasive species. We're going to be planting over 385 trees, planting over 1,900 native shrubs. And we're adding that all those is 40,000 square feet of mitigation, which would dramatically improve the environment. We've met the standard to avoid, minimize, and mitigate. This lot is 3.66 acres, and our original pre-app had 29 units on it because that's what we were told was allowed for the site. And so with the natural resources code being removed, we're down to 18. And so we've avoided 1.5 acres of that whole site completely. We've minimized our impacts by building 12, which is the minimum in the code, instead of 18. And then we're mitigating the 40,000 approximately with the 385 trees. And that will dramatically improve the environment. It's a mapped natural resources zone, but if you've seen the site, you saw the aerial, it's a lot of dirt. It's been parked on for the last 30 years with RVs and cars and all sorts of stuff. And it's mapped as a map 6, called like a development area, I think. It's from map 6 from the city code. It's meant to be developed. It's zoned for single-family residential. And then, so in the staff report, the staff mentioned moving the lower road closer to 19th. And we can't do that because it's already at the steepest grade possible. We've already tried to do that. And so it's a steeper grade to make sure we moved it as far away from the slough as possible. That is already a steep slope, and we can't do that from an engineering perspective to meet all the code criteria. And the clustering has been done to the extent practicable. Any option down below with the cut and fill requirements is going to impact approximately the same amount of space. With that 9-unit alternative, we've submitted a new map that showed that 9-unit in the original did not have parking up above, which to minimize or avoid the HCA, we'd have to do parking up above, which would push all those houses further in the HCA as well. And you're still looking at a big wall of house, and no one from the street would be able to see the river and the greenway. And then in terms, you were asking questions about the mitigation site and flooding. April 2019, this year, we had all that flooding in Salem. And the whole mitigation site was above water when all the flooding was happening in Salem. And the Statesman Journal said that was expected to be the highest water since 2012. And I have photos in this material that I think you guys have as well that shows the mitigation site above water. The staff report says there is a propensity to flood. I have never seen that island where the mitigation site is. Parts of the island, like the rock on the very far outside edges, the water raises up, but the mitigation site above the ordinary high water, which is 20 feet of elevation, hasn't flooded in the last 5 years that I've seen. These photos were the highest water that I've ever seen, and it was not underwater. I think, is there anything else I need to address? Go for it.
I think that sounds good. I'm Todd Iceland with Iceland Architects, 1307 7th Street, Oregon City. We've been working on this project with Matt for about 2 years. To get to this point, we've looked at probably 40 or 50 different options for the design and layout of the site, with everything from small cluster units and different types of housing, and looked at several different attached options as well, but determined, based on the neighborhood and what we were hearing, that there was a real desire for detached housing rather than attached housing. So that's why we've headed this direction with it. We've tried to cluster everything up as high as we can on the site. Once we were unable to get a map adjustment for the HCA area, the HCA area coincides with the 100-year flood line, basically. So even though there's no real pristine environmental area that we're trying to protect, we are treating that as such. But by developing the upper west section or eastern section as much as we can, we're able to mitigate and enhance the rest of the site. So that's really the approach we've taken with this. We're really limited with the driveway, with the slope of the driveway, and getting the fire department turnaround down there. And that's, unfortunately, we can't really push it up any farther, which we would have liked to have done. We did look at some outrageously ridiculous items like developing on the island itself. We decided that just really wasn't economically viable to do that. We do have challenges with the site, but I think the challenges will make this a special development at the end of the day, if it's done right, and we want to make sure it's done right. We had some additional information an hour before we got here today about the flood elevation may need to be adjusted. I'll let the engineer and the environmental consultant talk directly to that. We would need to make some adjustments. We need to verify the velocity of the river at that point as well. It is in the AE zone, which would change the way we're planning on structuring the building slightly. It doesn't make construction infeasible. It means we probably would have a rigid frame supporting the structure above the garage with breakaway panels rather than just flood vent construction, which is more typical. We looked at data from when the Tillicum Crossing Bridge was built, and if we're out of the center channel of the river, we believe the velocity zone's less than 5 feet per second, which would enable us to go with a more standard construction. So we're still working through some of those issues, and obviously we want to make sure everything's done right and proper at the end of the day. So we need time to digest that additional information, but we'd like your input on the project and hopefully some conditions that we can move ahead with. So.
Okay.
I
answer any questions, be happy to answer them. And like I said, we've got an environmental consultant and a civil engineer here that can talk more directly to those issues.
Great, thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Do you
Finish.
have questions for us? I'd love to answer any of your questions.
Do you want to finish, or then you want us to ask you questions? Okay.
Today we finished we've designed a basic, let me try to get to the slides. Space, there we go. Renderings. We'll have nice character. That's the mitigation area. It's very heavily vegetated with blackberry, which proves that it can be done. And we've had borings to prove the depth of soils. We've had a geotech do studies of all the soils to prove that those can be done. Civil grading. Here's what I'm talking about, the flood vents. So these can be built with standard flood vents. Typically, with the code requires anything flow above 5 feet.
We can use this scenario with
Yeah.
flows of less than 5 feet per second. Center of the channel is 5.9. Studies from Telecom Crossing show it closer to 2.
Yeah.
So,
The Telecom Crossing study shows 1.9 instead of 5.9 for the flows. The engineer will touch on that a lot more, but this shows what can be done with flood vents in the. So basically, you're asking detailed questions about how the foundations would get built. You could put holes in the foundation or flood vents to where the water would just flow through the crawl space and out. There's been multiple houses built in the Willamette Greenway and in the floodplain in West Lynn, and all you do is put flood vents in there to let water flow through. In case there ever was a flood vent, the water would flow through the houses.
and the floors are raised a foot above flood elevation, so there's no damage to the living space.
And all of these would be designed to the FEMA flood code and the criteria. I would ask that you would approve this proposal with conditions. I know there's a lot of stuff to sort out, but we've submitted a lot of materials that proves it can be done. And there's a lot, the Telecom Crossing proposal, there was a question about a LOMAR number, the letter of map revision. We have that in the most recent materials. There was a letter of map revision submitted for the Telecom Bridge, which proves that that is a good model, because FEMA submitted a lot.
We need to get staff to agree with that, though.
Yeah. So,
Did you want your engineers or other team members to come up, and then we can ask questions of
okay.
Sure.
Yep, that'd be great.
all of you? So, because we might have some,
Okay.
be more efficient probably this way.
Sounds good.
Hello, my name is Ken Valentine. I'm the civil engineer on the project. My address is 205 Southeast Spokane Street, Portland, Oregon 97202. And so I want to apologize. I've been on vacation for 2.5 weeks, and I came home and had 1 day to respond to the staff report. So I did my best to do that. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of the issues that they had mentioned. I presume that you have all read the staff report and saw so there were some issues on the first one, which kind of later just came up about an hour before this hearing, was if you look in the code title section 18.04.03, it states the designed flood height means the higher elevation for the following: the elevation of the 100-year storm as defined by the FEMA flood insurance studies as shown on Zone A of the flood insurance maps, or a water surface elevation 34.5, the elevation of the 96 flood event measured for the Willamette River. So as we've been going about this design for the last several months, we've been using the 100-year flood event because it's 37.4, which is clearly higher than 34.5. The code doesn't say in this section that you need to take 34.5 and add 3 feet to it. It just says 34.5 feet. It doesn't say what datum it's on, it just says 34.5 feet. So that's the way we've interpreted it. If we need to make adjustments to do that, we can make adjustments to the elevations. But the reason why I'm just explaining why we did what we did, because that's the way the code is read. So considering the bank full stage, there's numerous ways to interpret what the bank full is. Sometimes you interpret it as the top of the bank, sometimes as Metro does the 2-year event on the river, and we can certainly provide that information. Again, I'm sorry that I didn't have time to get all of this information done. As far as the crawl space design goes, I'll defer to the architectural drawings on that. The drainage impacts to neighboring properties, the way we've graded the site is we've graded it so that everything as much as possible drains to our stormwater facility, which it's been referred to as a ditch, but it's not a ditch. It's designed based on the City of Portland's stormwater management manual for a vegetated swale. It's the same type of water quality system that was installed at the Milwaukee Park, just across the street here. And those drainage facilities, those water quality facilities are also below the 100-year floodplain line. So it is feasible to put a water quality facility below the floodplain line because you're treating the 2-year storm or lower events. You're not treating the 100-year storm event. When those catastrophic events occur, unfortunately, you can't deal with that situation. So as far as pipe, I also talked about the possibility of water backing up into the pipes. It would be no different than any other area in the city where when we hit the 100-year event, pipes are going to back up. But you're not required to design your system for the 100-year event. So the roadway elevation in the staff report, they mentioned that we needed to raise the road elevation by 3 inches. We had the center line of the roadway at 1 foot above the 100-year floodplain, and the road has a crown, so the gutters would have potentially been below that 1 foot. So we can easily raise the road 3 inches to accommodate that. There's also been some mention, the HECRAS model. So the process I've worked on flood studies for most of my career, and I've been an engineer for over 30 years. And I've done dozens of flood studies and dealt with FEMA and done LOMAR studies. I've done studies in the Dalles where we added 50,000 cubic yards to the floodplain. So this is a small project comparatively. And the way the process works is we would have to do a no-rise analysis to show that we're not inundating any other properties when we do the fill on this site. And that process requires submitting a model to FEMA, that they would review that model and accept it. Normally, you go to FEMA and you ask for the existing model of the river. This model was done in 1978, and the digital model does not exist anymore. It was lost many years ago. So the process that we chose is we looked to see what other studies have been done on the Willamette River that have been accepted by FEMA in recent years. And the most recent study that we found was the Tillicum Bridge crossing. There was a no-rise analysis and a LOMAR done for that bridge project. And so I contacted TriMet and got permission to get a copy of the model that they used. And that model goes from downtown all the way to the Willamette Falls. So we took that model and just looked at cross sections just quickly to address the velocity issue. In a channel of water, if you've ever, when you're a kid, if you threw a leaf in the river and watched it float away, the edges of the river, the fringes typically have lower velocities because you've got trees, you've got all these things that are interfering with the flow. It's going to be a little shallower. The center of the river has less friction there, so you're going to have higher velocities. So when we took our first look at this, looked at the cross-section here, which actually lines up perfectly on the FEMA flood map, there's a cross-section E in there, and this site lines up perfectly with that cross-section. So we looked at that cross-section at the 100-year flow, and we can, by that, looking at the model, running the model through there, we can see what the velocities are on the fringe, and they're much lower than 5 feet per second on the fringe. And not sure where that, is that aerial available pretty easily?
It's not on this. I don't know.
Oh, okay. If you look at the aerial, you can tell, as an engineer by observation, I can look at that and I can see that we're just not going to have quick rushing flows at this area just because of all the vegetation, the other natural features there. But we would confirm that, obviously, by doing the real calculations. And that's the best way to do it. The FEMA flood study shows a velocity of 5.9, and the way they get that is they take the area of the cross-section and they divide the flow rate, which is in cubic feet per second, by the area of the cross-section, which is in square feet per second, which gives you a foot per second, which is a velocity. That's a great way to get just one number, but it really isn't reality for the way a typical channel will flow. Unless it's made out of glass, you're just not going to get the same velocity in the center of the channel as you are on the edges, because there's just different characteristics to the ground cover there. So the model that we used was accepted by FEMA, and it is part of a LOMAR that was submitted for the Tillicum Bridge. So it's a good model that we would use as a starting point. We'd take that model and review it, look at the existing conditions, and just verify and calibrate it to match up with the current FEMA flood study. And that once we had that, then we would accept that model and use that data from the model. So it's a typical process. The stormwater management, again, the Public Works Code states that they use the city code has adopted the City of Portland Stormwater Management Manual for water quality, and so that's exactly what we've used. Again, that it's not a ditch, it's going to be a vegetated swale, and in the plan set you should have, there is a landscape plan there that shows how that'll be vegetated. It'll actually be an attractive feature. It's not just going to be a ditch in the ground. You know, it's intended to be aesthetically pleasing and provide the water quality before discharging to the river. So, I'd be happy to answer questions if you have any.
Did you want to make some statements too? Anyone else on the team? I thought we just save our questions and then ask them as a group.
It's up to you. My name's John McConaughey. I'm the environmental consultant on the project. I work for Environmental Technology Consultants. We're located at 375 Portland Avenue in Gladstone. Tonight I was going to restrict my comments to comments on the staff report, and I passed out this paper here with our little logo on it, and these. I'd like to address the last issue under summary of issues on page 15 first, and that is the proposed mitigation area appropriate given its propensity to flood and in its current natural state? First of all, I come from a fisheries background, and all the restoration projects I worked on before this were in floodplains or in riparian areas, oddly enough. And there's a reason for that. That's where the fish are. But there's another reason, and that's the riparian and floodplain areas are the most valuable habitat areas around, and that's why we want to restore them. And so in answer to that question, I say these areas represent some of the most valuable habitats in the area, and they are in harm's way, and they should be. And that should not, and it does not preclude them from being considered as mitigation and restoration areas. In fact, it's because they're in floodplains that we consider them for restoration. And the examples are Springwater Park and Elk Rock Island, both in floodplains, both have the same issues that our mitigation area will have. There's a correction to be made here. Somewhere in a previous response, I said that the entire island would be plowed up, and that's totally wrong. I don't know how I wrote that. We're not going to plow up the island. Staff has questioned us whether we should be bringing in mulch and compost. And I'm not sure if that was intended to discourage us from bringing it in or just asking about it. But anyway, mulch and compost are typically required for mitigation areas because you're removing the invasive vegetation, you end up with bare ground, and you need to cover that so it doesn't all wash away. And also the mulch helps the new plants develop because it holds in the moisture. Now, if mulch and compost is counted against the fill that you have to use in your no-rise calculations, and I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but if it is, then we can address that. Let's see, staff has asked us to provide how we're going to access the island area because, well, it's not really an island, especially in the summer. We can access it in the summertime using the same public pathways that all the people who go out to Elk Island use. In higher water times, we can access it by boat. There's quite a bunch of areas one can launch a boat around here and access the island, so I don't really see that as an issue. And I think that, in summary, I think we can meet all of the questions that staff had come up with on the mitigation, and it shouldn't really affect the success of the mitigation. Staff wanted us to include all of the area that is above the 20-foot level, which is 41,000 and some odd feet. And we think that's a good idea. In one of our earlier responses, we had drawn out an area of 38,500 square feet just to show that it would fit on the island. In reality, you'd want to do the whole thing. And the difference in size isn't much, but you don't like leaving a buffer of invasive species around your mitigation because they'll just come into your mitigation, and so it's better to clear them all out. If staff has any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, great. Thanks for all that information. So I think we need to organize our questions, in terms of natural resources, engineering, architecture, overall project. So does that work for you guys to, okay. Who wants to go first?
I don't have such an extensive list of questions this time, but I do have one. I think it might be best directed to the applicant, and I think he'd be the best one to answer. But feel free to obviously bring in your consultants as needed. There will be an HOA, a homeowners association, who would be responsible for maintaining the mitigation for the standard 2-year period or longer if conditioned.
Yes, there would be, and there's also a bond that ensures the success as well.
In terms of the Willamette Greenway criteria to provide public access to the Greenway, have you considered alternatives that would provide public access for view purposes and other Greenway criteria through the pathway on your design, or possibly through transferring the eastern part of the property over to a public entity?
The criteria requires it to the extent legal, and we've left it open. I'm not gonna go and chase people down for walking down there, but right now there's no public access down there. It doesn't change that fact, and the criteria is to the extent legal and required. And so I'm not against alternatives, but at this point, I mean, I think we meet that criteria.
Okay, thank you.
So can you address the alternate access at this point?
Alternate access for what?
As I understand it, there was a discussion about a secondary access.
Oh, alternate access. So originally, Sparrow?
Address that if we can get to the site plan. We proposed a driveway up here off 19th Street for this home. What we're going to do now.
Gotta turn the excuse me, can you turn the power on?
Good job grabbing the mic, though. You're the first person that's ever done that, naturally.
It shows it right there. There's a driveway there now.
Oh, yeah, right here. We have it shown here. These driveways, the driveway for this new home here and the driveway for the rest of the development, they were too close together. And that was just recently identified as an issue. So we've moved that around there, so we're not requesting a variance for that, if that's what you're referring to.
So is there one access?
There's just going to be a single access.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, we just got this afternoon. When we got the staff report, our civil came back from vacation, and so we got that adjusted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. I have a question about the 40 to 50 designs that were considered on the site, and a statement that your sense was neighbors wanted detached versus attached. I guess I'm curious as to how you collected that feedback and what kind of engagement you had with the neighborhood.
So I've talked with Milo extensively during the beginning of the project. I've also spoken at the neighborhood association. The comprehensive plan also talks about maintaining maintaining the single family, the character of the neighborhoods, which is single family. The R5 zone is designed for single family, and the views, with all the criteria, the views and stuff, they maximize and maintain the view corridors as well. And then we've looked at lots of designs. Originally, we had a design that extended Sparrow all the way down, which is a public road, which we could have partitioned at that point, but then we decided not to eliminate impacts to the HCA and water quality resources. In Sparrow, there is a wetland over there, and so we decided not to do that because that would have wetland impacts and HCA impacts. And so there's a lot of alternatives that we've looked at, but in reality, when you come down to it, by the time you set back the houses with driveways away from the road, and if you put a road down there, the excavation and the cut and fill would disturb this part of the site, no matter which variation you do, by having a road down there. And if we did anything up at the street to get the driveways in, it's pushing them back into the HCA anyway, and it would block all the views. And the code, in terms of clustering, is talking about avoid, minimize, mitigate to the extent practicable. And there's a lot of reasons why that's not the best option, due to the views, due to, the big tall houses right up the street, to not fitting into the neighborhood. And Yeah, so that's a lot of the reasons. And of our initial discussion, we felt like that was what the staff was wanting originally, so, from the pre-app hearing.
Can I follow up on your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you spoke with the neighborhood association about the concept?
Yes.
And so what stage were you at when you had that discussion with the neighborhood association? I mean, was that recently? Was it a year ago? I mean,
That was, I don't know, 6 months ago, maybe?
6
But
months
we
ago?
had, those renderings were done for that neighborhood association meeting, so we've made a lot of minor changes to the site plan, but the basic design hasn't changed much. The houses, there's some minor changes that have happened. The bioswale was changed. The road's in the same spot since then.
Understood, thank you.
So it's basically the same.
Okay. Thanks.
You're probably going to want to get your environmental guy up here, because I just have one question. And then property at 12201, which is the one down at the bottom of the hill, do you know what the elevation of that one is? Did you guys do any of that? I was trying to look on the map. It looks like it's like 32 feet, but...
No, it's,
Or at
I
the
couldn't
top of one?
exactly tell you, but it's close to 36 feet. I would have to pull up,
Yeah. The
oh,
one down
201. Oh, that's, sorry, thank you for correcting. I was thinking it was 205. So 201 is approximately
It's about 31, 32.
31, 32. There's a big bank that goes down there. From visually, it looks like it's 4 or 5 feet lower.
Which datum is that?
It's the datum that the flood,
And sorry, you have to speak into the, yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
So based on the topography there, it's at about 31, 32 feet, somewhere in that range. So it's significantly lower than the base flood elevation. What was there a second part to that question?
Just half tongue-in-cheek, which datum?
Oh,
it
the
was in.
datum, yeah. That's based on the datum that the current, the flood study is based on, so.
And then the house that is above that, I think I'll probably need you guys both on up here.
This one?
Yeah, there is an access drive which then connects to that 201. Did you have any conversations with that property owner of being able to use that access point in the future, or are there plans to guard against making sure that that access point is not used? Or does height just take care of it? I mean, is that road going to be so high that it's never going to be able to meet? You understand what I mean, right?
Yeah, that won't connect. That road is significantly lower than our new private drive will be.
So I just want to clarify, you're talking about this right-of-way up here, I think, what is it called?
Ren.
Or-
Yep.
You need to speak into the mic.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There is a kind of a road that comes down here and accesses these two.
Yes.
But there's no right-of-way through here, so this is private property.
Right, and I was just asking because it looks like that there is a dirt road to a fire pit back there.
Yeah.
And so I was asking the question, was there any talk about working with your fellow neighbors and using that as an access point, or at least knowing that there used to be an access point there, and does that access point get eliminated?
That access point would be eliminated on our property side of things. That approximately, that road is going to be 7 feet lower than our private drive.
Okay.
It's much lower in elevation. For where that driveway goes down, you could see it when you go out on the site from 201 to our main land right there next to 201 where their shed is. There's like a 4 to 5 foot drop so the elevation is significantly different. And as we adjust the grading, it would make a significant difference to where you wouldn't connect through. In terms of talking to the owners, the big house has been in foreclosure for a long time, so you can't really get a hold of banks and ask them those kind of questions. And we had talked to the 201, and they would not sell to us that if we looked at an option, and it wasn't going to happen with them.
And then I have an environmental question. So there is an active bald eagle's nest that is very close to your property. Have you done any evaluation of what that would do to nesting bald eagles with the height of your buildings and the added density?
I haven't been asked that question prior to this, so no, I haven't looked at that issue. The standard procedure would be you'd go to Fish and Wildlife and consult with them on that, and then follow their recommendations.
Yep. I have, yeah.
So, sorry to confuse things.
No, and we can bring up some more chairs, too. Let's see.
So our firm has natural resources people as well, Harper, Hoff, Peterson, Regalis. And we did send one of our natural resources persons out there, I guess maybe 2 months ago or so, to look at that nest, and she determined that it was not an active nest. So, and wasn't even sure if it was an eagle's nest. So, but.
Well, we know it was an eagle's nest. It may not have been active for the last couple of years, but
yeah,
everybody was hoping that the nesting pair was going to come back. So,
yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, I just had a question generally about the recommended conditions of approval that staff provided, and if there were particular items within here that you disagree with or feel that you won't be able to meet.
No, we all believe that we can meet all the conditions of approval. We've done a lot of extensive engineering and due diligence in this from environmentalists, and HHPR's person was a raptor specialist that came out, and I've heard there was an eagle there. I was told about a year ago that it hasn't been there in like 3 or 4, probably 4 years by Milo, and that was about a year ago. And so the active eagle hasn't been there. I've heard stories in at least 4 to 5 years, and the raptor specialist determined that it was too small of a nest for a typical eagle in terms of dimensions, and so they assessed that it was most likely originally an osprey nest that had been inhabited. The tree would not be taken down or affected by the development. We're not going to touch that tree, so.
Okay.
And it's set back. It's at least 50 feet away from the structures.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So now we are going to do some public testimony portion, and we take the testimony in the order of those in support, those opposed, and neutral. And I have 3 up here that are all in support. So we will just go through the list here, and if we can limit it to 3 minutes. There's only 3 folks, so that'd be great, and then we don't have to mess with this thing, but we'll use the honor system for people to try to keep themselves at 3 minutes. And we'll start with Lorna Murray, and if you could come and state your name and address for the record, and then you can start your 3 minutes.
Okay. Lorna Murray, 19100 Northwest Skyline Boulevard, Portland. I just wanted to say that this property will be better than by the time he's done doing everything that he's going to be required to do. It'll be better than when he bought the property. When he bought it, your floodplain map showed, the close-up showed 15 cars, and I don't know if everybody's familiar what it was before he bought it. People were afraid to go out onto the property. The neighborhood, is a beautiful neighborhood, and Matt has incredible vision, and the properties that he's going to build, the pictures that he showed, it will be far better than what it ever was before. And to be honest, the community will be really lucky to have him do what he's doing, it really will be beautiful. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Milo Denham. Okay, and I'm sorry that I wasn't aware you're a neighborhood district association chair. Commissioner Hamer just told me.
But I am here today as a citizen.
Not as a neighborhood, okay.
I'm
Let's
not
not
here-
confuse things.
You don't get 6 minutes then.
No, 5 minutes. My name is Milo Denham, and I'm here as a citizen. I'm not here as the chair of the Island Station NDA or as a budget committee member. I live at 12106 Southeast 19th Avenue, and I've lived here for just over 6 years with my wife, Pam. I live 1.5 blocks away from the proposed development. It's interesting that my house is not in the Willamette Greenway, and I'm on the east side of 19th, which is the opposite side from this development. But my neighbor across the street from Bob White on the east side of 19th is in the Willamette Greenway. Change is difficult, but I'm okay with this proposed change. I'm in favor of Elk Rock Estates because of several reasons. About a year and a half ago, Brett Kelver, thank you, Denny, for sending him, came and talked to the Island Station NDA and noted that because of the size of the lot and the two combined, there could be up to 32 units built here. And we had fears of 3 long buildings of 10 units each stacked down the hill there. And so to see a proposal of 12 units was very appealing and appreciated. I also like the fact that the homes would be located below 19th Avenue and not all connected in a row up to 19th Avenue, which would definitely take away the view and make you feel like you're walking next to a canyon like you often do on Division Street in Portland. And that would not match the current state of the neighborhood of individual detached homes set down below the street on 19th Avenue. Personally, I like the architectural style. I guess you would call it an alpine style with post and beam and stone facades. And I personally don't mind the large garage door on the bottom floor. And I'm okay with 3 stories because it's broken apart. It's not a single solid beam. It's broken apart down below. And I believe that the high value of the new homes will increase property values in the surrounding homes and the neighborhood. I don't believe, and we had sort of kicked around the idea that it would be nice to have access to that walkway down below, but it's private property. I don't want people looking at my house and the little path I put in my garden and think they should be able to walk through it, so I don't feel that I should have the right to walk down there. There's Spring Park and Elk Rock Island, wonderful views that, you know, the public has access to, so we don't need access to that little airspace down there. That's the HOA's property. And the eagle nest has not been active for about 3 years. It was a bald eagle nest. It might have been taken over by from an osprey, but it hasn't been active for 3 years, which is disappointing, but that's the way it's been. And so it's slowly, deteriorating. I would like to ask the following. Spring Park and Elk Rock Island visitors create parking congestion in this area, and this has been a long-term problem for the neighborhood. Please do not require sidewalks on the driveway into the estates, and instead make the driveway wide enough to allow for parking on one side of the driveway to help alleviate the parking congestion in that area of the neighborhood. This is one of the key concerns that I have for this development as we bring in more homes. We have people trying to visit the neighbors there, and also we have lots of visitors for Spring Park and Elk Rock Island. And recently, the Sunday before the 4th of July, we counted 500 visitors coming into the park there one day. I think that by adding some stop signs around some of the intersections, because none of them do have stop signs at this point, would help slow down the additional traffic and help make it a little bit safer for us. I would also ask that you require the city to create more parking space at Spring Park. master plan that I've handed out, which has just a few pieces of it, was from, I believe, 2009. There's been another one that's been come out since then, and the newest one does not refer with the map on the additional potential parking for Spring Park. It would be great if you could push the city or nudge the city into trying to finally look at this master plan here and try to implement more parking. The city should consider creation of additional parking along the west side of 20th Avenue, which is on just east of the railroad tracks as it goes along the park. They could also consider converting a small portion of the southeast corner of Spring Park into a parking area, and that might possibly allow creation of a path from that small parking area in the southeast corner down through into the bottom wetland, and that there's a potential there of making that path ADA compliant, because the current path is not ADA compliant, it's too steep. So overall, I'm glad to see you reviewing the key areas of floodplain, natural resource areas, and the Willamette Greenway area. And I appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
I do. So are you saying that the access street, you are asking not to have curbs? Could you explain? Could you explain what you were talking about, not having curbs?
No,
Sidewalks.
No side. It doesn't need a sidewalk into there. It would be great if it was wide enough to allow for parking along one side for visitors that come in to visit with the neighbors there.
In the lower section of the drive, or in the beginning part? Both.
But just on one side. If they could allow parking in there and make it so that it was wide enough. I understand now that there's a problem with it being too close to the driveway of the other house, but if you could allow that to happen and then create extra, parking is going to be a problem. And so allowing this here driveway is really nice. If you could get parking on just one side of it, down at the bottom end as it comes in, that would be really helpful.
And so your solution, for not having the sidewalk, you could still pave it and be able to have people park?
Park, yes.
Okay.
Just like 19th is a Voner Street and doesn't need sidewalks. This here basically would fit into the neighborhood without sidewalks. If you put sidewalks in, it would be one of the few areas in the neighborhood. We only have sidewalks in front of one house. We're finally getting some sidewalks on River Road and 22nd Avenue, which has been our arterial streets. So that's coming from the SAFE program.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for your testimony. Finally, Pam Denham.
Hi. So I'm Pam Denham, 12106 Southeast 19th Avenue. I am speaking as a private citizen, even though I am the chair of the Land Use Committee for the neighborhood. I would like to reiterate some of the points we made in our review of Elk Rock Island Estates. But first off, I think that the whole development is very thoughtfully designed. He's really put a lot of effort into it about, getting together with the neighborhood and everything else. It could have been really hideous, and it's not. It's a new idea, this whole natural cluster area and the natural resources area, but it's worth exploring. I realize it's going to take a lot more time and effort and all new hurdles to jump over, but it's new, and it doesn't mean it's bad, it's just new. So I like the idea of it, and I think that we should go forth with it. So I'd like to reiterate some of the things we talked about, which was views. And views are going to be impacted no matter what you put there. I think the idea of putting houses on the street would have been horrible, and you would see nothing. So he's actually considered that, and he's made view corridors. So it's not as bad as it could be, for lack of a better thing to say. My concern personally also is traffic, because we do have a Voner, for we worked very hard to keep the character of our street where most people walk. We have very limited traffic. I think the average miles per hour was 8 when they did the traffic study a few years ago. And so that's why we don't have sidewalks, because we all enjoy wheelchairs, scooters, bikes, people walking. I am concerned about the impact of traffic. And so I suggested some stop signs at 19th, one at Sparrow, one on Bluebird, and one at Southeast 22nd to help mitigate the people that are coming down into those new houses and their visitors. I also wanted to talk about the sidewalks. I don't think they need to have any in there because we do need to allow for their friends parking. They do have parking for 2 in the garage and 2 in the driveway, but we all know we put stuff in our garages, not cars. And so it's nice to be able to have room for your friends to park there and not have the neighbors that are visiting the park there. I'm not sure how that would work, maybe a permit system, I don't know. Oh, and one other thing, two, actually. The lady that spoke earlier, she's correct. I've lived there a little over 6 years. It would be a vast improvement over what we have. Anything would be, but this is a good idea, I think. And I talked to Matt, and he said, because we were concerned about it being a gated community with the HOA and everything, which would not be in character with our neighborhood. And he assured me verbally that it would not be, but I would like to make sure that it's not. And I think that's about it. Thank you.
Any questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Thanks for your testimony. Okay. So, do we have any questions regarding testimony to this point?
The entire testimony or just public testimony?
It says, do we have any, the script says, does any member of the Planning Commission have any questions regarding the testimony?
I would like to ask the
this
applicant
point.
one real quick question, if I could, please. And I think, yeah. Are you okay with the new proposals to the timeline?
Hi.
Good evening, Chair Travis, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Michael Robinson. My last name is spelled Robinson. My mailing address is 1211 Southwest 5th Avenue, Suite 1900, Portland 97204. Commissioner Hammer, you wanted to ask about the timeline. I don't think it's a problem, but I want to talk. I'm hoping the Commission might want to take a short break between the end of the public testimony and applicant's rebuttal. And I was hoping to talk to Vera and Denny for just a moment about the schedule. I don't think there's a problem in general with the schedule. I don't think there's a problem with your deliberating to a final tentative decision on, September 24th rather than your August meeting. And I don't think there's a problem with the applicant extending the 120-day period further. But I want to talk a little bit, now that I understand what Vera's concerned about, I want to talk a little bit about the open record period before we commit to it and before we ask you to adopt an order on the open record period.
Okay. So,
would you mind if we defer? Let us talk.
it's great timing. I need to take a break anyway, so this is perfect.
You want to do it now, or
yes.
or
Let's do
before
it.
rebuttal?
We're up to applicant.
Well, is this, where are we in the process right now? Are we before rebuttal?
Well, I don't think you've had your opposition testimony yet, have you?
There is no opposition testimony.
Oh, let's close the hearing then. I'm just kidding. So if you've had all your public testimony, if I could just have a moment, if you wouldn't mind taking a break, let me chat with Denny and Vera and the city attorney, and then we'll propose something to you.
Great. Okay.
Okay.
Can we do 5 minutes? Is that enough time? We've got some other items we need to cover tonight.
I can't imagine 5 minutes wouldn't be adequate. I think that's
Great.
just fine.
So we're just going to take a 5-minute break.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Gonna bang the gavel.
Break. right, we're back from our 5-minute, which was 10-minute break. And we had an audience member, a neighbor, a community member that wants to provide some testimony. So we're going to hear that, and then we'll do the applicant rebuttal. So I'd like to call Chris Roberts up, and if you could state your name and address for the record, and then you heard the drill, 3 minutes.
I'll be as brief as possible.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. My name is Chris Roberts. My partner and I just bought the home 12203 Southeast 19th Avenue. So this is literally in our backyard. This is very new to us. We had no idea that this was a possibility. When I saw the possibility, I thought, wow, there must be some good reason to build in a floodplain, since we have seen over the last many years the impacts of climate change, floodings that everyone is saying, oh, the 100-year flood is now something that happens every few years. And I was waiting to hear a good reason to build in a floodplain, but it seems like the only one that I heard was there was a mismeasurement, and there's a 1.5 foot difference, and maybe that's enough to massage this into place. To me, that's very surprising, because exactly 1996 was a long time ago, and we've seen major impacts on flooding across the country, and if not yet here in Portland, I would think pretty soon. So considering the distress signals from the earth that we've been hearing for so long, is quite surprising to have something this impactful right next to really one of the most lovely parts of the Willamette River. It honestly seems like just trying to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. I don't know why on earth you would want to build something so close to such an incredible natural feature. But again, I was expecting to hear some good reason for building in the floodplain, aside from just development and development for development's sake. 1.5 foot difference, again, considering the difficulties we have with rivers and flooding all across the country, it just, I'm flabbergasted, actually. So I will digest all this, and I'll be back at the next hearings, and I'm looking forward to this. I'm not, in a sense, against development as such, I suppose, but of all places to develop, this seems like one of the most obvious places not to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. So now the applicant can provide a rebuttal and talk about the calendar. And then we'll close the public hearing.
Chair Travis, members of the commission, Michael Robinson again on behalf of the applicant. Shall we talk about the proposed final written? Okay, great. So here's what we discussed with staff during the break. I believe they're in agreement, but I would encourage them to say otherwise if they're not. So we would ask the commission to hold the written record open as follows. 2 weeks from tonight until August 6th for anyone to submit argument and evidence, and those terms are defined in the statute. An additional 7-day period until August 13th for anybody to rebut what comes in during the first open record period. Staff issues a staff report on August 27th, so 2 weeks after the evidentiary record closes. Applicant submits its final written argument 7 days later on September 3rd. Then this commission deliberates to a tentative decision on September 10th, and then you come back and adopt findings and make a final decision on October 8th. So we've moved the schedule out by about 3 weeks, 21 days. So whereas the applicant had previously extended the 120-day period till November 1, we now extend it to November 22 if the commission adopts this schedule. That's enough time for the commission to make a final decision in October, the city to issue notice. If there's an appeal, it's enough time for the council, I think, to at least schedule the hearing. And I've told both the city attorney and Denny and Vera, if more time is required for the city to render a final decision on the application, the applicant will grant reasonable extensions. But for now, based on this on the schedule that I just read, we would extend the clock until November 22, 2019. And the dates for the August 6th, August 13th, and September 3 dates, submittal would be by 5 p.m. to Vera, Denny?
Yeah,
Do you want 4 o'clock?
what do you want to do? What?
I think 4 would be better,
Yeah, let's.
so that
Okay.
if something shows up at, right before 5, it would give a little bit of time
Okay.
to collate all of the
I-
comments. So-
I usually mention that, Chair Travis, just so there's no confusion by either the applicant or the public as to when and to whom the submittal should go. So with that, that's the schedule. Before you close the hearing tonight, if you'd like to adopt that, we would appreciate it. And then I have just a couple of very short responses to some of the commission's questions, if I may. I thought the questions were quite good tonight. We appreciated the thoroughness of your questions and the thought you've given to the application, and we'll use our 2-week period to answer them. But I wanted to do a couple of things before we close tonight, and I'll work down to the last issue, which probably takes the most thought. Commissioner Burns, you asked about the criteria for views in the Willamette River Greenway Zone. So all of that is derived from Goal 15, the Willamette River Greenway Goal, and your code embodies some of those factors in 194016. 2 of the factors are views, sub C, protection of views both toward and away from the river, and then as Denny pointed out, sub G, maintain or increase views between the river and downtown. So 2 points, it's not the Greenway, it's the river itself that the goal and that your code implements the goal is concerned with. And secondly, just to note, and you've already heard this from Matt, but if the applicant were to construct the houses up on 19th, there's clearly more of a view impact than what the applicant has proposed. In your record is an April 29th letter from me that discusses views. I wrote the letter shortly after we met with Denny and Vera, and it has the site plan that was before you tonight that shows the view corridors. And we understand the staff report to find that the view criteria are satisfied, and we believe that's the case. But I wanted to note the express criteria from your code that governs your evaluation of that factor. The second thing I wanted to talk about, Chair Travis, were your questions about the residential cluster development in 19402. And I thought they were good questions. I'll concede this. I've constantly gotten confused in your code between cottage cluster and this. So now I don't feel so bad. But there are 5 criteria. We will address all of them. I think, Matt, verbally at least, the applicant attempted to address them, but we'll put them in written form and explain why we believe the criteria are met. But the bottom line is, I think this code is the City Council's idea that you're going to save development in some areas by clustering development in other areas, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. And I think you heard a couple of the folks that supported the application talk about that tonight. I need to get my phone to go to the last issue if I could. This concerns, this concerns the email from Ms., is it Bertel? We appreciate staff looking at this issue and giving us a chance to respond to it. And I have to say, Farrah's been great. She constantly provides information to us, and it's been easier to respond to it because of that. So we appreciate the courtesy of staff. But this concerns the design flood height. What you have is a July 23 memorandum from Kim Valentine wherein he addresses 1804030, and that says that the design flood height means the higher elevation for the following. Sub A is the 100-year storm as defined in FEMA flood insurance studies and is shown as Zone A on flood insurance rate maps, or water surface elevation 34.5, the elevation of the February 96 flood event measured for the Willamette River. That's the express language out of your code. So that's how one establishes design flood height. It's the higher of those 2 options. That's all the code offers. What the memorandum from Ms. Bertel says, she quotes the language, and then well, let me just read the paragraph that's relevant. The 1996 flood elevation in Milwaukee City Code is 37.978 feet NAVD 88, which comes from the referenced elevation in the code 34.5 NGVD 1929. So let me stop there. I don't have a problem with her language at that point because I think it's consistent with the code. But then she goes on and says, converted to NAVD 88 using NOAA Verticon or VertCon. That language is not in your code, and I think you should ask your city attorney during the open record period. My preference would be, I'd like to know what your city attorney thinks about this, but on behalf of the applicant, I would offer you this simple legal theory. You're bound by the express code. You can't insert or subtract language from it, and I apologize, I've had a couple hours to look at this and think about it, but my sense is, no matter how well-intentioned, what she's inadvertently done is inserted language into the code that's not there, and you're bound by the expressed language. So I don't think, my opinion, I'm happy to be persuaded otherwise, and I'll think about this more, and if I come to a different conclusion, I'll be honest enough to tell you. But my view at this point is, just as Ken said, you just rely on the plain language, and the end of her email, the end of what I read you, is not in the code, and I don't think it's permissible to evaluate it that way. Therefore, you don't get to the higher elevation. So, as I said, I've just had a little bit of time to look at this. I'm giving my legal theory. I believe it's correct at this point. I certainly think it's fair that you hear from your city attorney at some point, maybe not tonight. He's probably reluctant to talk offhand as quick as I am not. But anyway, I want you to be aware of that view, and we'll try and respond to that in writing. So thank you again for your time. We appreciate all of the citizens who came out tonight to talk, and we hope that we'll answer all your questions in our evidentiary submittals, and at the conclusion of your evaluation of the evidence and argument, you'll too find that this is the right project for this location and approve the application. We do agree with all the conditions of approval, including the extended 10-year monitoring period. We think that's a good suggestion. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we
Ask questions about the extended.
need to talk about the timeline. Yeah, go ahead, because I want to make sure we get that clear.
You know, my understanding, if the 120-day clock runs out, or if the extensions to the 120-day clock run out, is that, can you confirm that the application would be approved by default as submitted if the clock were to run out?
Only if they go to the court and
file a suit. Mandamus, the ball then essentially goes to their clock, or to their court once the 120-day clock runs out. They have to take a decisive action to file a mandamus action in circuit court.
May I?
Yeah,
you
please.
didn't ask me on behalf of the applicant.
Yeah, please.
We are not going to let the clock run out. I've done 7 writs of mandamus in my career. They're dismal affairs, primarily because you're asking a judge who doesn't hear land use to decide land use.
Okay.
So it's a great remedy in theory, but I'd rather give you the information and let you approve it. I'm not going to let the clock run out.
So why wouldn't we just extend the clock long enough now to fully accommodate a potential appeal period and decision by
I believe
council?
you did.
What I heard is that that wasn't enough to get through.
Well, I think we're speculating about exactly how much time we need.
Okay.
It depends on when your council could accommodate a hearing and how long it took. I mean, we could just say to the end of the year, but frankly, I'd like to have some impetus to get the council scheduled and hear the appeals. But I've said on the record, if November 22 is not sufficient, we will extend by other reasonable periods of the clock. And you have that representation on the record.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did that?
That was perfectly adequate. Thank you. Okay. Yes.
I did have a question about the schedule. So it's anticipated that we wouldn't be able to get to a final decision on that we would need to we would do our deliberation and then come back and make a decision. Can you talk to me about that? Why do you think we wouldn't?
I think the idea is that after the various comment periods and the rebuttal and so on happens, then the commission will deliberate and reach a tentative decision on September 10th for the final decision, which is essentially reviewing and approving the findings based on what your tentative decision is on September 10th. So it's really, frankly, it's providing staff the opportunity to pull everything together from the deliberation and all the written testimony to be able to craft the findings and whatever other additional information is required for that final decision, and then we would issue it after that.
Okay.
So
That's common in some jurisdictions.
Okay.
Like Oswego never makes a decision and
At
adopt the
deliberation.
findings at the same meeting.
Okay.
We're a little more streamlined, and
Okay.
I like it.
Okay.
But in this case,
This
a
exception
little less
is a little-
streamlining
Yeah.
is better
Back
to
and
make
forth.
sure we get it right.
Otherwise, we're here writing everything and talking.
Yeah, right.
Record and.
It does get a little awkward in that respect. Okay, that helps, thank you. Any other questions about the timeline, or we're good with adopting that?
Given everything we've heard, I understand the rationale, and I think it makes sense. I'm a little bit disappointed to be having this go on as long as it will, just because it is easier to deliberate while things are fresh and the facts are in our head. So I don't see any opportunity to make this happen more quickly than what's been laid out, given the need for all of the back and forth that has to occur. I think the one place where we might be able to tighten it up would be to get together on, was it September 10th instead of September 23rd, and maybe move it up 2 weeks. So I wonder if that 2-week bump up is reasonable.
It depends how, what you guys do on September 10th, I guess.
Okay.
And what's in our forecast?
Well, no. I'm saying it depends how difficult it might be to craft the findings after the meeting, if we've actually gotten mostly there prior to the meeting with our staff report, then we're probably okay.
So we're reviewing the written testimony and the applicant's written rebuttal on the 27th.
And it's possible.
No,
on the 10th.
That's on September 10th, and then we need 2 weeks follow. Okay, all right, I'm good with it.
Okay.
Close the public hearing.
All right, so, all right. Well, we're going to go ahead. We've agreed to the schedule, and we're going to go ahead and close the public testimony portion. If I can find my...
And I think that would just be closing the verbal testimony, and that the written testimony is still open.
I think I'll make a motion to that extent.
Okay. So you move that we are going to close...
Based on the number of issues involved in this application, extensive public input to date, and a request from the applicant, I would like to recommend that the commission open the public hearing and take testimony, close the public hearing, but leave the written record open and continue the hearing to September 10th for deliberation and a tentative decision.
Okay.
I think we're continuing to a date certain of September 10th.
Okay. Great. Second?
Second?
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Close it.
Thank you. Nice gavel.
It's very strong gavel there. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Be seeing you again.
Yeah, so I've noticed that the new person behind the desk likes to add in little words on their paragraph that makes it hard, that you kind of just can't.
Oh, is that in the staff report?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't miss that.
Get your stuff off of there.
I'm not a Windows person,
Yeah, I don't.
and I can't get them out. I'm not sure.
somebody else do that.
Wait. Okay. Did that work?
Can't get up for 10.
All right.
15 minutes before you.
Don't close it.
Okay. Here.
You need to get.
I just need a thumb drive. I'm not sure.
Okay, here, I think we can eject it here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Just pull it out.
That's not safe.
Would you see yank out a thumb drive?
I mean, I
Do it all the time.
Okay, here we go.
Is that the right way?
That's it, right?
Who cares?
There you go, thanks. You could start while I find my
Oh,
file.
okay, great. So this is type 3 no, is it type 3?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, moving along, we are going to open
Actually, I think this one's a type 4.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah.
an annexation. Sorry. Oh, boy. Okay. The public hearing on file A A-2019-002 is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider legislative amendments to the right-of-way annexation.
I don't think legislative is the right word there, but, okay, that's a text.
Okay.
Okay.
The purpose of the application is to request right-of-way annexation on property located at Southeast Lake Road and Southeast Kuehn Road, is that how you pronounce it? Near 4900 Southeast Lake Road. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning ordinance, comprehensive plan, any applicable municipal code provision, and that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I will recognize those persons who have completed a testimony card and submitted one to staff. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you're here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. The Planning Commission will make a recommendation to council regarding whether the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance section or sections where the criteria can be found.
Can I give you that 1 second? Like right about now. The approval criteria are in the code, and I'm apologize for not being ready to answer this question. This same thing caught me at the council the last time we did this. But it's in the I should know it off. I should know it here.
You should, Denny. You should know it.
That's why I have staff do all the presentations.
It's on page 4 of the staff report.
MMC 1911 is where the criteria, 1100 is where the annexation criteria is found in the code. It then references some state law, ORS provisions, and Metro Code requirements. And Metro Code is Title 309-050. But other than that, I will talk in detail a little bit more as I go through the presentation about what those criteria are.
Great. Commissioner participation conflicts of interest. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain?
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts?
No.
Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand?
And say yes.
And say yes.
Yes.
Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application?
No.
Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission?
Nobody cares.
Nobody's here. All right, Denny,
Okay.
you're on.
Well, this application is very similar to the application that we had a month ago or so, annexing the community college and the right-of-way. So this is strictly a right-of-way annexation. And originally, we have gone to the council and had the council act on the annexation of the Chirigino Farms subdivision. And we did that one through the expedited process, which is the process that we normally follow. When we were getting ready to do that, we realized that we could have slowed that annexation process down and gone back through this two-step process like we're doing now. Because the applicant, the developer in that case, was in a big hurry to try to get their subdivision completed, and we wanted to make sure we got it into the city, we did it. We isolated just the property and did it through the expedited process, which goes directly to council. It's the way we normally do most of our annexations. That property, at one point we thought that we wanted to include the right-of-way because it's the only gap now between this property and most of the city. This property also touches the North Clackamas Park, but that point is down here. So this then finishes out sort of the portions of this site that actually abut other parts of the city. So we wanted to annex that additional right-of-way. Because it's right-of-way, there isn't, the owner of the property is essentially the county. So we needed to follow an alternative process for this. And the process that we're following is one that is initiated by the council. The council passed a resolution initiating this, or a motion initiating this process, which allowed us to go forward. It means we can't do it then through the expedited process, so we have to take this two-step process of coming to Planning Commission and then going to the council. So, but this will essentially complete out the annexation that has sort of already occurred for that subdivision. The approval criteria, again, these are from our code, located in the urban growth boundary, contiguous to the city limits, meets the ORS requirements for initiation of the annexation. That was the council motion. Consistent with comp plan policies. This is inside our urban growth management area, so it's areas that were expected to be annexed, complies with the Metro Code sections related to agreements and urban services. This is all right-of-way, so there aren't other urban services that would apply here, and then complies with city zoning and map criteria. The way right-of-way are treated is we zone them based on the adjoining property. So whatever that property is zoned, we apply that zoning to the right-of-way. So that's basically my presentation. If you have any, there's another picture of the land area that's being annexed. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
None here.
This is just for my own edification. So the right-of-way actually has a zone. Its zone is
well, you know, our zoning map reflects the zoning.
Right.
I mean, I think it's unusual to sort of go through this process to say we're zoning this property.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand it. I don't know.
If in theory the property were the right-of-way were vacated, which in this case it's highly unlikely that would happen, you would want a zone to apply to that. So that is essentially why we would zone it.
I hadn't thought of that. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, I'm sorry, I'm in the minutia here. So if you have zoning on one side of the right-of-way that's different from the property on the other side of the right-of-way,
Center line, unless unless you have purposely put the line somewhere else.
Okay. All right.
So in instances where we may have some places around the city where we have the entire right-of-way is in the city limits, but the one side of the right-of-way is outside of the city limits, and I'm not sure what zone that's going to come in at. We would show that right-of-way as being zoned within the city, whatever was to the.
I'm going to shut up so that other commissioners don't.
Those were great
Bounce on
questions.
me.
That was really good.
Yes, because I was thinking the same thing. Are you good?
I was just going to ask, it looks like that, is it only the street and not the sidewalk?
No, it's the right-of-way. It's the full right-of-way.
It's the full right-of-way?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm sort of sorry we had to come back and go through this process, but we really wanted to go, we normally would have done it with the annexation of the entire development site. It's just timing-wise, this made more sense for us to do it this way.
Should we do a motion?
We trust your judgment.
Thank you.
Ready?
Can I do it, Greg?
Do it.
I motion that the commission recommend approval by the City Council of Annexation File A-2019-002, including adoption of the proposed ordinance and exhibits found in Attachment 1 to our packet.
I second the motion.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. This decision is a recommendation to the City Council, which will make the final decision after a public hearing. Please see planning staff for details concerning the City Council hearing date and process. Or do you have that?
I think it's happening on August 20th, but I am not 100%.
People can follow up with you if they have questions about that. Okay. All right. Great. Work session items, we have none.
There was one more item.
There's a planning department other business updates.
No,
Street
none.
rename.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Planning Department, other business update.
Street renaming. Keil Crossing Subdivision.
Yeah, in this subdivision, there was a,
Okay, sorry.
I don't want to call it an error because there was logic behind it, but there was a problem with the streets, the way they were named. I don't have the staff report in front of me, but I think it's 43rd. Is that the one that gets?
Yeah, 43rd.
43rd. So we have a 42nd Street, and we have the subdivision created a 44th Street, and 43rd and 44th connect, and 43rd ends up being this east-west street. Well, the way they were numbered is very confusing because the addresses on our 43rd Street today end up being somewhere in Portland when you type it into the 911 system. So the police department basically asked that we rename this section of street. In your staff report, there were two names, and the way street naming happens is normally it would be the city engineer unless there's a planning commission. And so since there's a planning commission, you guys get to suggest a name to the city council. It could be Hemmer Street.
Right? That's what I'm thinking. That's what came right to my mind.
Rolls off the tongue,
Travis
doesn't it?
Parkway.
Yeah. Please.
But the
Egner Street.
there is a street just to the east that one of the engineers suggested because it's close and it sort of lines up. But honestly, I think that causes more confusion.
Yes, it does.
Thank you all for agreeing. But I didn't strike it from the original staff report. I kept it in there and suggested Keil Street.
I thought it was Keil.
It is Kyle.
Kyle.
It is
Thank you.
Kyle.
I like that.
I like Bodie McBoatface Street. If you could, come on.
Kick you out of here.
And there's no second for that one.
No, I mean, I think that it maintains with the historical nature of the property. I mean, when we approved that, I mean, we heard a lot about the connection to the history of the city, and I like calling it out as Keil Crossing. And it's a new name, and it doesn't conflict with other existing names. So, others?
Kyle Trail up in Forest Park in Portland.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it's not a street.
Okay. Is that good?
A motion.
Not going to name it after you.
The only other name that I could think of would be Hosley, which is related all the way through. That it was the seller of that property. Hosley is a famous name. They owned the Standard Flour Mill, and then they owned a furniture shop downtown. And Mr. Hosley and his sister owned actually a lot of property in town. I mean, so. I think.
I didn't do any analysis to see if there were other Hosley streets around, though.
Well, I mean, I think Keil Street is fine. It will always be called Keil Street, but Keil Street's fine.
Okay. A motion, please?
A motion, yeah. That would be great.
I would propose that the aforementioned 43rd Street be renamed Keil Street to reflect the historical connection between the neighborhood.
Do we want Keil Street or Keil Crossing? Sorry, declare.
Keil Crossing is the subdivision.
Oh, okay,
Street
Keil
is the
Street.
street,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you, sorry. Okay, motion,
Second.
Keil Street. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Recommended to City Council.
Okay, great.
Nice job, Denny.
Thank you. Great. Well, here we are to the committee updates and discussion items. I haven't been attending any committee meetings lately, so I don't have anything to say about that.
It's summer, and you've been busy. I explained kind of what was going on with CPAC. We've got a packet that's probably going out tomorrow with revised policies on Block 3. Haven't taken Planning Commission comments and some of the comments from the CPAC members last time, so that we'll have to see where they go.
How did the open house go?
You know, we had, I think maybe 50, 60 people.
That's not
trickled
bad.
through, you know, it was good.
Yeah, I had another meeting, and so I didn't.
So I haven't, and the comments from the open house were, you know, pretty consistent. There were a couple things people had concerns about, like reduced parking. What did that mean? Some things like that. And
Was it videotaped? I tried to find it, and I didn't see anything, so.
No.
Okay.
No, the question was earlier about whether or not the time period had closed for the for that, and I think it's tomorrow.
Okay.
And then we're going to compile the materials and get it out to the committee and to the.
There'll be a report.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to hark on this, but I would really love to, when we get into that Block 3 discussion, if you could take the map, you know, with this description of high density, medium density, low, and just draw a quarter circle around everything and make it yellow, blue, and green, and then that way when all the colors match up and when they're purple, that means that you know it can be high density in that area.
Well, I'll see what we can do. Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
Okay. And then our forecast for future meetings. So August, we have 2 meetings scheduled and a hearing and 2 work sessions. So we'll get those Block 3 policies here on August 13th. Then we've got August 27th for the, well,
That home occupation.
Yeah, that home occupation.
That's going to actually be maybe a tough discussion.
Okay.
What is it?
It's not straightforward.
What is it?
It is an application out on Lake Road for multiple home occupations at one site. And they're asking for a variance to the home occupation.
So read the home occupation code.
Yeah. So it is a.
Do that
but
tonight when I get home.
It's more complicated than most.
I have to give my regrets in advance for the 13th. I'll be unable to attend that one.
Okay. And then the Hillside Master Plan, that'll probably be half an hour, 45 minutes.
it's a big deal.
Presentation on what it is, on what's going on.
I'm sorry to miss that one.
Okay.
Okay.
And so if Lauren was watching, congratulations. Glad everything turned out great, and happy life. She had her baby,
Yeah.
so.
When did she have her baby?
Friday before our Planning Commission meeting.
Okay.
There were some complications, but everything is fine now.
Great.
Oh, good. That's good news. Thanks. Okay, well, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Please.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.